Welcome to the next tutorial. In this tutorial we will learn about the forms and how we use the forms in HTML. Forms are actually used to create input field container in which we create different types of input fields. Input fields are used, for example, on login and sign up pages. We do see that there is an input field for email, password, and for example there is an option to choose the gender and so on. So that is actually part of the forms. So if we start our document with HTML, and in the head of in the title we just give it as our lecture name, for example forms. So if we do save it and then we try to open this page, then we will say that it will be opened inside the browser, and here we can see the forms on the top side. So how the form container works and how we can add elements to the form, let's learn about this. So before getting started we need the body tag, and you know that in the body we do create our body items. Form tag is used to create the form. So if I do save it and refresh it, then you will see there is no data over here right now because I have not added any input fields to the forms. So basic input fields for the forms are text one, so we call it as a type, and if we give it a type text and we simply close it and save, and then let's see how it looks like. So here we can see it's a simple text field which type is text, and now we can write over here, like for example forms lecture. Okay, so this is how we create the input fields. There are different types of input fields which also have different attributes. For example, to this form we can give an ID attribute, and for example if we are creating this for name, then we can call it as a ID of the name. And to mention this ID, we normally use an attribute which is called also the for attribute, and that for attributes actually is the label of the input element which are actually shown together. So whatever the ID of the form is, you need to ID of the input field is, you need to give that ID of the label as well. So for example if I am creating a label for name, then I will say it, okay, that is a label for the ID name, and then this ID because the ID of this input field was name, so I put this for as a name. Okay, and here we put the text against the label, and we can call it for example the name. And then if we refresh it, and we can see over here that this input field is for the name. To make it little interesting, we can add h3 tag, and in that h3 tag we can say HTML forms that we are going to study today, for example. Then if we want to give name and break between the input field, we can add a br tag at the end of the for label, and then we refresh it. Here it says the name and then the input field of the name. Similarly, if we because this is type text, so when we type here, like for example Jack, we can type over here. And then we also know that sometimes we do need the password input fields, right? So if I do create a label for password, and in that label I create a input field, and in that input field the type should be password, because because the label is for password, so I will give it as ID as password as well. So if now we do refresh this and see that it has a password field over here, and we need to put a line break over here, so it will come to the next page. So if I do refresh it, I can see over the name and the password, and if I do type it now, then we can see it's showing as the password field. So this is how you can play with the input fields, and you can then make your forms accordingly, and you can add some comments as well. So later on when you see your code, then you will understand what you have typed and how that is being worked. So then if we see few more things, like for example what other things are in the form, but before going forward we always need to give a name to the input fields, because when we will submit this form through PHP or through JavaScript, then we do need these name attribute to get the data of that specific attribute. So we always need to give a name, and for example I do give this name as a password. There is one more thing, there are few more things like on click, on change, attributes that we will learn further in the next lecture, but in this lecture we will try to learn basic things out of the forms. Then if we explore a little more about the forms, then we can find out that if there is a radio button input field as well. So for example, if I say okay, I need to ask gender of the user, if I do save it, it will show like this. And then to ask the gender, obviously I need to give male and female gender, so user can choose between those. So for example, if I give a label of for label of male, and then input type radio, and in this radio I will give ID of male and value as well male. So value is used when we submit this, okay. And then if I close this input field and refresh out here, then we can see okay, here is a male option against the radio button. You can put this radio before and you can put the label after to make it little more interesting. Then obviously we need another label, and that label is for female option. So how do we create it? Similarly we did for the male section. We will call it input type radio, and ID we will give it for example female, and in the value we do send the female. And then obviously we need a label for this, and the ID of this input field is female, so we will call it as a female label, and we do give input explanation of the female. So if we do refresh our page, then we can see over here the male and the female. So now if I do click male and then I do click female, so we can see it both are checked. So the reason behind this is because we have not given the name attribute. So if I give it a name attribute of gender, and here also I do give a name attribute of gender, and then refresh it, and now if we try it, then we can see it's only giving us option to choose between one of them. Similarly, if we little move forward and we do add few more things in the form options, like for example if I try out and see how the select option work, and the select option is basically used to select between the multiple options, and we can select the options select. If do we refresh, we can see here okay the select attributes, and for the selection we can say okay select for example country, and in this country we now need to give a select option. In the select option you need to give the options, okay, whatever options you will give. Like for example if you gave it a Pakistan and then you give it a USA, and then if for example you give an option of UK, and then if you do try and refresh this, then you will see it that okay, one second, okay, just refresh it, and then you will see it's give us a select option, and now you can select between the multiple options, and you can select the option of the country from the select attribute. So you also need to give it a name, because once you will submit this form it will work accordingly. And then you also need to give it an ID for your label, or even if you want to select it using JavaScript, then you need to click through this ID. So this is how the select attributes work. Similarly, then we do have another important attribute which is called the checkbox. The checkbox is used normally to create multiple options menu. So for example, if we do say which colors do you like, and once we do say that, and then we can use a checkbox option, and we call it as input type checkbox. And this checkbox we can ask the user which colors he likes. So for example, if we add a label and we give it a label for white, and we give value of white inside it, and we give ID of this input field to the white, and if we do save it and refresh, we can see it's showing us the white checkbox. If I do copy this again and I add another one and I call it, for example, black, and over here I add black option, now we can see it's showing us multiple choices. Similarly, we can add as many as we want, like let's try with green, and then we will see it will appear the green option inside the checkbox as well. So this is how we can add the checkbox for multiple options of form. Then similarly, we can add few more things which we will learn in the next lecture of the part 2, because it's a big topic, and those will be for example text area and those things. But there is one more important thing, and that is what is the action of the form. So if I do call it as a get, it will post the data inside the URL, and then we can also give it a target. So for example, if I give it a target underscore blank, like we do see inside the hyperlinks, that whatever target we give it a blank, which means it will open a new page, and then we can give it a target of self, then it opens that in the same page. So then what we need to do is to submit this form on a specific URL. Then we need a input type submit, which will actually submit our form to a specific URL, and for that we need the action where we want to post this form. So for example, if we want to put this on the lagoon.php, and for that we do need a submit button. So the submit button will be, we can do that as well. So what we will call it is submit input type submit, and we call it as, we give it a value of submit. And if we do refresh the form, then we can see a submit button over here. If we just put few BR, so we can differentiate from the other form. So if I do submit it, then it's going to a page which is actually login.php, and you can see it's also sending us the data here, name, password, country, whatever the things we have given over there. Then its name is empty, password is empty, because we have not written over here anything. So let's, if we put some data and we call it John, and then we put a password of 1 2 3 4 5 6, we choose the gender as male, we choose the country as USA. We have not given the name to this, so that's why it's not sending, but we can give it a name, and then it will send those checkboxes as well. So if I do submit, and then I do see here it's sending us the name as John, password as 1 2 3 4 5 6, gender as male, and country as USA with whatever we have chosen, and it's sending to login.php. Because we don't have login.php right now, that is why it's saying you could not find. Once we will study the PHP, then I will show you how to receive this data and then store inside the database. This is how our forms work for the get method. And then we do have another method which is called post. Post data is more secure than get. Get data is basically for now you will be able to see it's only showing the login.php. It's not showing any further data in the URL, because get is used for the URL and post is a server side request, which is more secure, and you can send infinite data in the post body. But in the get you can send, for example, URL length of 2048 bytes. That's why it's recommended for non-secure data. There is one more attribute we can add over here, that is on click and on submit, and those things of attributes which we will study once we study out the next lecture and the things behind this. So this is how you can work around the forms, and there are few assignments. If we look on those assignments, then we will try to complete them. So those assignments, first you will try to complete is like this. You can add a heading over here, and then first name, and then you can add input type field, and then similarly you can add input type date, input type email, which will help you in writing the email, then the input type text for the mobile numbers. Then you can add 2 buttons against that. Then similarly, after completing this assignment, you will try and create one more assignment, which is actually a feedback form. If you will try it, it's actually inside a list, so you need to create a ULLI and unordered list with these blocks, and you will then create those things like radio buttons. It's and further you can add the text area and input type file. So this is used to choose the multiple to choose 2 files, and multiple is another option, so that is a JavaScript or jQuery feature. And then you will also work around this, and this is also similar form you can create for radio buttons, for the select, and also for the checkboxes along with the text fields. Then you will try out this form. This has a menu as well, and 2 menus actually, and then you will have a fields over here, and now you cannot put the BR over here, or you can use the table view for this, or you can try out manually in a list or any other way which you can think you can do it this assignment. So good luck with the assignments. We will meet in the next lecture with more features in using the forms. Thank you.